Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Thought Leader webinar series. For everyone joining us live today, you may use the live chat feature below to ask any questions at any time throughout today's webinar. And if you're joining us in a recorded webinar, please feel free to comment below, and our team will respond to you directly with any questions you may have. For those who are new to our webinar series, my name is Betty Acker. I am part of our marketing department here at Stewardship Technology. Our goal with our webinar series is to provide tools and resources to nonprofits and faith communities in effort to provide support to their cause's mission. Here at Stewardship, we are a community that is focused on serving, and we're thrilled that you have joined us today to our July Thought Leader webinar as we explore Google Grants. Today, our guest speaker is Jacob Barr, co-founder of iRapture.com. iRapture.com is passionate about using content strategies to help organizations communicate to the appropriate message to their desired audiences. This is often realized through web design, messaging, advertising, and a range of other content creation work. Today's webinar, we will be sharing a valuable resource available to nonprofits. Google Ad Grants is an advertising resource that Google provides to help expand a nonprofit's voice throughout web audiences. Today, we will provide you an overview of Google Grants, how you can define your monthly spend with the grants, as well as tracking, ways to engage this summer with your content, and we'll also dive into SEO a bit to provide you a full scope of what you can do to reach new audiences. Today's thought leader, Jacob Barr, has built a business that has kept God first from the beginning. He co-founded iRapture in 2000. The name of his company, iRapture.com, was chosen with the goal of keeping God first. Jacob is a designer, entrepreneur, marketing professional, and a friend to many pregnancy clinics and nonprofit organizations. He has worked with over 200 pregnancy clinics and over 200 nonprofit organizations over the last 19 years. Just last week, Jacob was on the marketing panel for the International Life Services Advanced Training Institute in Austin, Texas, where he addressed several advanced questions about Google Ad Grants. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you today our thought leader, and welcome, Jacob Barr.
Thank you, Betty. I'm really glad to be here and to be able to talk about Google and Google AdWords grants. So let's start off. I'm not sure where many of you may be when it comes to the Google AdWords and grant work. So I'm going to start at the beginning. So the Google AdWords grant is a $10,000 per month grant to essentially have a ongoing budget to reach your audience through essentially having your ad showing on the top of the Google search result page. Essentially, when it comes to a Google search result page, they're typically made up of ads at the very top and then followed by organic search results, maybe a map section, and perhaps some information about a business on the side where Google My Business information shows up. So the part that we'll be talking about today is at the very, very top and also the very bottom where the ad section shows up, where there's a title, a description, a link, and then some other extensions or pieces that might be there as well. So essentially, this grant gives a nonprofit the ability to reach their audience with the desired message based on the content on their website. And so this is a vehicle, a marketing vehicle to reach your audience, just like other advertising or marketing vehicles exist. This is a really important and exciting marketing vehicle where a lot of people can be reached, utilizing Google advertising and then having that funded with these grant dollars. So one of the questions that often comes up when it comes to why is Google doing this, or are they going to be taking this away in the future? And I believe the reason why they're doing it and the reason why it's going to be here for a long period of time is because it's making the cash side more profitable by raising some of the prices per click for cash users by allowing nonprofits to advertise and sort of raise the price points, as well as it's it makes Google look, essentially it's good community service to work with such a large number of nonprofits across the board when it comes to so many different areas of nonprofits. For those who can use this Google AdWords grant, definitely includes pregnancy centers and pregnancy clinics. It includes churches and a wide number and range of 501c3 organizations. Essentially, the requirement is that you have to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and essentially that includes all 501c3s with the exception of maybe some schools and some hospital/medical facilities. However, with pregnancy clinics and churches having educational programs, they are still allowed. And with pregnancy clinics having medical services, they are also still allowed to use the grant, even though the exception of some medical groups has been there since the beginning. This grant has been in existence for about 6 years, and it has evolved. Well, not evolved, but Google has continually made changes to it, and they continue to make changes to it regularly, often to improve the options that people have to work with it, as well as trying to improve how it will benefit the users, the people that will utilize Google to find what they're looking for. Essentially, they keep evolving this, updating their system to make improvements to how people can reach their audience with the right message in a way that the audience will enjoy and appreciate. Betty, let's go to the next slide. So I would like to, one of the other questions I often get is, can I pay someone with part of the grant to work on the grant? And the answer is no, you can't pay someone with these grant dollars because these are Google dollars, not cash dollars. And even if someone was willing to work for, quote, Google dollars, that would go against the policies of how the grant works. Essentially, this grant allows you to advertise your nonprofit's website properties. Like if your organization has one website, that's pretty typical, but some organizations actually have multiple websites. And you can actually advertise all of your website properties, but before you advertise additional websites, you would want to make sure that they are registered and approved by Google before driving traffic to an additional website address, because otherwise you'll get your account turned off if you advertise any website URL beyond the one that was approved or have, or beyond the few that you have received approval for. But essentially, these Google dollars can only be used for they have a lot of restrictions on where they can be used. They can't use them anywhere in Google. They're essentially just for these Google pay-per-click ads that show up on the Google search results page. And they're not accumulative. So, essentially this $10,000 per month grant comes out to be essentially between, well, if there's 31 days in a month, then it's $322 per day. If there are 30 days per month, then it's $333, and then like in February, it might be $357 per day. But the idea is that you actually have a daily budget when it comes to what you can spend using this grant, and then it adds up to roughly $10,000 per month. But the idea is that you have a daily budget that you use over the course of time. And if you spend less one day, you can't spend more the next. Essentially, you have to keep within that daily budget when it comes to how this works. And we'll be looking at some examples of how that plays out on some future slides, or on a future slide. BJ, go ahead and go to the next slide. So when I was preparing this presentation, at first I had the reporting at the end, but I sort of wanted to show how this works and sort of show some of the numbers for how this can effectively work. Because one of the other one of the questions I often will talk with, I'll hear from people who are working with the grant is that and this is very much true, but it's a bit of a frustration for people who are working on this professionally, is that the grant dollars are definitely treated very differently than cash dollars. So Google takes cash at a very high priority, and they will let you spend the cash dollars when it comes to advertising with a cash-based grant, a cash-based AdWords account. They'll let those cash dollars just flow through the system without having the same sort of quality metrics in place or restrictions or limitations. But when the grant dollars are being used, Google puts the user's experience above spending these grant dollars or these Google dollars. And so when it comes to spending grant dollars, we essentially have to have high quality metrics in place that have high quality content, high quality ads, high quality experiences being taking place in order to get traffic, because Google, some quality metrics will, if the quality is too low, will have the account turned off or flagged before it's turned off. And it seems if the quality is too low, then it very much impacts the traffic that will be given to an organization if their quality is too low in certain areas. And there's a lot of areas where quality is measured. So with this report here, essentially this is showing that for 1 month, from June 1st to June 30th, the last month, this pregnancy clinic had 1,000 clicks. And so you can see how the clicks come out over the course of this graph, but overall they had essentially just a little bit over 1,000 clicks come in. And I don't have the CTR on here, but I believe it was about 12% for this organization currently. But let's say it was 10%, because that's a little bit easier to do math with. So that might mean that there were 10,000 impressions, and 1,000 clicks means that we had a 10% CTR. CTR stands for click-through rate. So if someone clicks on your ad 1 time out of 10, then you've got a 10% click-through rate. Or if they click on your ad 100 times out of 1,000, or in this case, maybe 1,000 out of 10,000, then that's a 10% click-through rate. And the quality, the quality control there is that it has to be at least 5%. So if your CTR was at 5% or below, then that reflects things that need to be, you essentially need to turn some of the bad performing pieces off and do some pruning, or make more well-performing pieces at the same time in order for your account to be considered healthy. And then the cost here is showing that over this month in June, which has a full number of days here, we essentially had, we had $9,960 spent. So we essentially spent 99% of the grant dollars in this example. And this is essentially a clinic in California, and it's near the Los Angeles area. So there's a lot of people in this geographic scope. So if your church or pregnancy center or your nonprofit is in a less populated area, you would have less of you may get a lot less traffic than this example here, because this is a very populated example. However, it is just one location, which is an interesting piece. For organizations that have a national scope, getting this amount of traffic is much easier when you have more population to reach out to and include in your geographic scope for who you're trying to reach with these ads and spend these grant dollars with. The next piece on here is this yellow box. This says $9.39 was the average cost per click. So a few years ago, well, 10 months or a year and a half, I forget when it changed, but for a long time, for the first several years, this grant had a cost per click cap of $2. And I believe it actually changed. It may have been January of last year. It may have been January of last year when it changed to take off that $2 max cost per click cap, and they essentially allowed nonprofits to use new bidding strategies, which would allow the cost per click to go above $2. And so this is just an example of, yes, it does go above $2, because it's also an often question that I'll hear, or a comment that I'll hear, is that grants are capped at $2. They used to be, and now they're not. So in the graph, you'll see that it says Wednesday, June 19th. That's actually my birthday, even though I didn't pick that because it was my birthday. But on June 19th, this one spiked on the cost per click. And in that little box, you can see that the cost per click on that day was $58.87. However, for the rest of the month, it was much lower. Just to once again, just demonstrate that that cost per click is no longer tied to $2, and in fact, it can reach above $58 at times. And then this is also showing that the amount per day is, you'll see that red line is very flat when it comes to the cost. That's because we're hitting the ceiling every single day on this account when it comes to that grant being spent. And this is not typical. Most grants are much, they might be spending $500 a month or $2,000 a month or $7,000 or $8,000. Most of them are not spending 99% of the grant dollars. But I just wanted to demonstrate that it can be done, and with the right population and the right setup and the right pieces in place. And then the average position. So on a given search result page, there could be anywhere from 0 to 5 ads, possibly more in some situations, but that's typically I see it between 0 ads on the page or 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Like that seems to be a normal range that I typically will see. Not to say that that's the only range, but and so position 2 would probably mean that it was the second ad on the page, or if there are only 2 ads, maybe there's one on top and one on bottom. So it doesn't always represent being the second ad on top. But being that it's the average position, that means that there's also going to be several first spot positions being used and several second and third spot positions being used. But to have it be on average 2 seems pretty decent for grant dollars to get to that level with all of these factors in place. And so if anyone has questions, feel free to use the chat window, and then BJ will either bring them up if it's really relevant to the topic that we're taking place, and we'll interrupt what we're talking about to address them, or she may keep them until the end. But BJ, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right. So how to write the best ad copy with Google Ads. So as I was reflecting on this part of the description in the presentation description of this webinar, I found myself thinking about, I bet a lot of people who attend may think we'll be talking about writing styles or how to write exciting headlines, but I'm actually going to be wanting you to reflect on I want your ads to reflect the content on your website. The ads should not be introducing any new creative ideas, any new language. They literally should just simply use the same voice, the same content, the same phrasing, the same language as your website content that you're driving traffic to. And the reason why that's really important is because when someone searches on XYZ as our vague 3 different keywords, they want to go to a web page that's about XYZ. And so it's really good to have your ads and the keywords that you're using to show up when someone searches. So when someone types in a keyword, we want that keyword and the ad that shows up and the landing page that shows up to all be consistent with the same language, the same voice, the same, very consistent when it comes to writing styles. Howbeit, the ads have a very tight character restriction. Like we can only have so many characters in the title, so many characters in the description, and so many characters in the link description and the different extensions that are applied. And so essentially we have to use the same voice, but it has to be more polished. There was this brilliant quote by a gentleman that his name escapes me from the 1800s that said, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time." And I love that quote because it reflects content marketing. It reflects polish. It reflects the idea that you can take something and make it have less words and have it have more clarity or just as much clarity, but requiring less time for someone to read it. And so anyways, we'll mostly be talking about content marketing on a bit because that's really important for Google AdWords work, is the content that is poured into your website and how it reflects on the content on the ads, and the words that are on that web page that you're sending someone to, that landing page, that web page, need to match the words in the ads and the words that you're letting someone search and have your ad show up on. Like that is one of the most important concepts, is to have everything be consistent. And so this picture of this beautiful mountain landscape, I picked out this picture as the backdrop because I wanted you to see how the lake reflects the beauty of the mountainside while being slightly less, but it's still, the idea here is that, you know, the ads need to reflect your website. The keywords need to reflect the website. And if the website changes, the reflection needs to change. So if you add content to your website, then that means that there's work to be done on the Google AdWords side, because there needs to be new keywords set up and maybe new ads set up. And if you remove content from your website, you definitely also need to do more Google AdWords work to remove any ads that were using those pages that were removed. I like the analogy of an iceberg, because icebergs move really slowly and they change slowly, at least from a distance. They look slow. I'm assuming you probably can hear some of that movement because they're moving. They're constantly moving. They're just moving so very slowly. And the same thing is true of organizations, whether it's a church, a pregnancy clinic, or another nonprofit. They're moving. Things are moving, and you may not see it day to day, or maybe you do, but you typically won't see it day to day. But if you look at where your organization was 8 months ago, or where your organization was 2 years ago, compared to where it is today, you should see how you can see how it's changed. And the changes, like with an iceberg, it might have changed by so many inches or so many, a distance. But when it comes to your organization, there's going to be things that change, and they're more easily spotted over time. And that essentially reflects how things need to be looked at. You can't just simply do it and call it done. You have to look at it again in the future to identify what needs to be changed, what needs to be polished in order to achieve this ongoing reflection. Having these pieces reflecting your current position, your current message, your current audience, how your audience is communicating, how your audience is using words in their world, and how you want to interact and communicate with that audience. And all of that needs to be reflected in these ads and in the keywords that you're using, but they have to be changed first in your website and content marketing, or the content on these pieces that we're reflecting with the ads. Okay.
So
yeah.
Jacob, we have a question that came in.
Perfect.
And this was relating to your previous slide on content in regards to obtaining the grant dollars. This is an anonymous question, so I can't tell you exactly who it is. But their question is, you said that you cannot pay someone with grant dollars to pay someone to work on the grant. What
Yes.
if you have other funding that allows you to pay someone to monitor the grant?
Oh, so if you have, I'm sorry, if you can't use these Google grant dollars to pay someone to work on your grant, but let's say you have another grant, or if you have another way of paying someone, such as a volunteer, or you're paying them with a different funding source, I'm just trying to say that these Google grant dollars can only be spent on your organization and for Google ads. They can't be used to pay someone's mortgage. They can't be used to pay someone's salary. They can't be used to advertise someone else's website. So hopefully that answers your question. But yes, if you have a different funding source, like an additional grant, or let's say you're working with Vitae and the Knights of Columbus are funding that effort, then yes, that would be grant funded money that is paying someone to have their grant maintained and built out based on grant dollars. But it wouldn't be Google grant dollars. It would be Knights of Columbus grant dollars managed by Vitae, as an example. But yeah. Okay. And then one of the interesting things about some of these, when reflecting on your content and the ads, the data is super awesome. So I'm not sure how to describe how. So like if I was to go to you and say, here are a few books, this is an example of a library. That's sort of what I feel like when I come across Google data, because Google tracks so much data, it's hard to fathom the amount of data and the types of data that they collect and how it can be used. Like literally, I feel like saying, I've got a shelf of books, and this is an example of what someone might experience when they go to a library with thousands of books. Because very often we'll use 5 to 10 to 20 different metrics or variables with the data, but there is so much more that can be combined in different ways to get so many other pictures and answer so many other questions. But just to keep things simple, I would recommend focusing on one question at a time and to use the data that makes the most sense. But one of the data pieces that makes a lot of sense is quality scores. So Google has a couple of different quality scores, such as the quality score of a keyword. So if you're using a keyword with Google AdWords, and Google will give it a rating anywhere from not rated to between 1 to 10. And they typically don't rate words unless it has enough traffic or enough data for it to make an opinion on. And so if a word only has a rating of 3 out of 10, then that represents that the content may not be that relevant to that keyword, and or the ads are not really connecting that well with that keyword. And there's room for improvement either on the ads and or probably both on the landing page where that ad is going. And so the quality scores is a really incredible opportunity to find out where the water is blurry and where it can be improved, or where the reflection is not working and where it can be improved. And so by using the data, we can essentially pour our efforts into where they're going to be effectively taking a low quality score, especially when it has traffic or potential traffic tied to it, and in order to bring it up. And it sort of goes back to this polish concept. You can polish something and then come back to it again at a future date and repolish it and repolish it. There's room to make things better. If you rewrite something, you can usually use less words and make it more clear. And if you rewrite it again, you can make it more clear for your current audience. And that's a repeatable process. It's not something that is, it's more often found that there's room for improvement than it's not, yeah. There's usually room for improvement through content polishing. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, so how to track, convert, and find more people to work with, or help find more church parishioners, church members, find more clients and patients for your pregnancy clinic, how to find more people who you're trying to serve in the community with your nonprofit goals and missions. So typically, this would be represented with a funnel, a big funnel, sort of like what you would find when you're changing your oil, where at the very top it's huge, and at the bottom it's very small in order to filter the oil into the car. But in this case, I decided to use a flat image just so we could look at it from a different perspective. But essentially, it's the same idea this represents a funnel. So Google AdWords is really good at identifying people that are searching for something. Like they have a question and they want an answer, or they have a blank and they're trying to find what goes in that blank. They're trying to solve a mystery. They're trying to relieve their pain. They're trying to, they're Googling something. And they're looking for an answer, or they're looking for something. So when they come across your ad, the ad's job is to communicate with that audience in order for them to click on the link or click on the phone number in the ad to take them to the next step. So let's say they click on the link to go to your website, and then essentially we're taking this baton that represents your target audience member, and we're passing it to the website to continue on with this job of helping someone reach the middle of this funnel. And so the advertising portion is to take people who are searching or needing your help and driving them to a place where they can get more information. And so the conversion tracking that Google AdWords has is primarily for this leg of the race, but not the entire race, or this part of the funnel, but not the entire funnel. We're essentially primarily focused on getting them to go from searching to your website, or to your phone number, or to your hours of operation perhaps, but primarily most of the time it's to the website page. That's the most common next step. And so the conversion tracking that Google AdWords has is another vast amount of options. Very often people will have, when someone clicks on an ad, and then if they click on the desired button that you want people to click on, then you could have that trigger a conversion. So like, let's say someone clicks onto your website from the ad, and then they click on the link that says schedule an appointment. That could, if it's set up, be a conversion. And every time someone clicks on that button after coming through an ad, that would tally as a conversion. And Google has a way to apply a monetary value to that conversion, essentially to try and represent, you know, how much benefit is being provided from these grant dollars. And another option would be to simply, when they go to like the thank you page after completing a form, you know, simply loading a certain page can also trigger a conversion. Another option is based off of the time they spend on your website. So if someone spends 3 minutes or more on your website, that might be your goal. And that can also trigger a conversion through Google Analytics. And so there's different ways of sort of tracking success when someone goes to your website. Like for example, if they click on the phone number, and I know clicking on a phone number may not be normal on a computer, but when it comes to a mobile device, it's very normal to tap onto a phone number and then call that number from a website. And 80%, on average, about 80% of the sites that we work with are typically being browsed on a smartphone or Android or iPhone. And so that's 80% of the devices being used to browse most websites. Some websites, it might be 50-50 or something else, but on pretty much on average, I would say it's a high majority. With PCs, laptops, and Macs and Windows machines taking up about 16%, and then the rest are typically, the 4% area is, or less, is typically tablets. The tablets are the smallest share. But so essentially, when it comes to this baton passing, the idea for Google is to bring it to the next step of the funnel. And then the website really needs to operate well in order to pass it to the next level, which might be to talk to a person or to have someone walk in during office hours, or essentially to take whichever call to action the website is promoting for someone to do next after finding that page. And so most call to actions are the call, to schedule an appointment, to fill out an interest form, to buy something. essentially it's to do something. And so the website's job is to take that traffic and then turn it into an action. And then sometimes that baton is being passed once again. So say, for example, for a pregnancy clinic, the baton from AdWords gets passed to the website when the client goes to the website to get more information on what they were searching on. And then when they click on the contact button or schedule an appointment button or call, they're essentially connecting to someone who can now talk to them. And the goal of the website is to get them to the counseling room. And then that baton is completely passed. So the Google no longer has an influence. The website no longer has an influence. It's now the counselor who's talking to that patient now has the baton in order to take it on to the next step. And so when it comes to how to track and convert site visitors into supporters, volunteers, and donors, there's a couple of different phases. And when it comes to the Google AdWords part, we can essentially track that conversion into the website. And then the website needs to track that conversion into essentially going into customers or the clients or patient, whatever you want to call that inner ring. And then once it gets there, your team essentially has to keep running to keep that baton in the middle. And so anyway, that's sort of how this works out. And essentially there is a way to track conversions. It's incredibly broad, it has a lot of options. It's very powerful, it works. But essentially, I feel like it's more like a baton being passed, more so than someone going all the way through the funnel with this one system. We're essentially trying to get them to the next phase. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a really cheery looking slide. Summertime. So what can you do today with all of this great information to engage your audience? Like, what can you do to take this information and what should you do next? So I had some trouble thinking through what to say to this point, primarily because I don't know individually who I'm speaking to, because everyone's in a different spot and everyone has different needs. So if you don't have a Google AdWords grant, then I would suggest working on getting a Google AdWords grant. So when I work on setting up a grant for someone, it typically takes 2 hours. Howbeit, those 2 hours might be spread out over about a week and a half. However, it doesn't always work that smoothly because sometimes someone already has a Google AdWords grant and they lost access. Or sometimes someone's website is 5 years old and Google will deny the grant because the website is not current. It's not mobile friendly. It's not modern. It feels old. And so if you have a current website and you're looking to get the grant, then that would be a great first step. But if your website looks really dated or doesn't have good content, you might find that you might need to work on that first because you might end up getting denied, but they would communicate that as part of the application. And it's just really good evidence that your website might need a rehaul, to be redone. And so, but yeah, so I would say when it comes to this, if you're not sure what you should do next, in order for me to really give you this kind of insight, I would suggest reaching out to either BJ or myself. And I would like to have a conversation about where you are, what your website looks like, what are you currently doing, and what's working and what's not, and then reflecting on where you should go next, more so than. But yeah, essentially, if you don't have the Google AdWords grant, that's a reasonably good idea to go forward to get it, but you may end up finding yourself having to do other pieces before it can actually go through. The first time I set up a grant, the very first one I did, took me about 7 hours because I did a lot of reading before I actually did the application. But the application is a technical series of steps. It's not a writing challenge. It's simply a matter of going through technical steps. I've come across several centers who have said that we got denied. And I love the hard problems because I always get the most joy out of figuring them out. And so we've been able to help people that said they got denied, but really it just meant that someone gave up on the application. Like they thought they hit a brick wall, but really they just needed to keep pushing through and keep going. So right now, from my experience, we've had 100% of the churches that we've helped apply get it. We've had 100% of the pregnancy centers and pregnancy clinics who we've helped apply get the grant, and as well as other nonprofit organizations. However, we do currently have 3 applications that are currently hung up because someone's website that we were helping apply for needed to be redone. So we're having to help them. Anyways, they're having to redo their websites before they can continue the application. And so that can be a delay. And the hardest one I ever worked on was one that someone had set up and then they lost all of their contact information for the person left. And we essentially had to work on regaining access to an account without the person being involved. And we were able to help regain access, but it was a lot of work. Like that was the hardest one to work on so far. But we were able to actually get access, which was, I was pretty amazed that we actually were able to get access to that one. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. Excuse me, sorry. Okay. So Google AdWords is not an island. So this is a picture of Manhattan. And as you can see, Manhattan has lots of bridges. And Google has lots of bridges. Like all of these pieces connect with Google. Google is sort of like this really awesome gold cog inside of a big clock. But there's all these other awesome bronze and silver and gold and awesome cogs that connect with Google. And they all work together to make the time, show us the time on the clock. And so Google all by itself won't work. I mean, you can't use Google AdWords all by itself. You have to have a website. You have to have really good content or have at least some content. Like, so if you don't have content on a phrase, you won't show up organically on that phrase, and you can't or shouldn't advertise on that phrase. But if you do have content, even if it's poor content, you can at least advertise on it. Not that that's a good idea, but the better the content, the better experience, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Google My Business, which is another completely separate piece, but it connects with Google AdWords in a couple of different ways. It reflects the quality of your organization, how it's set up. It reflects having a current information about your hours of operation available. Since there's also an extension within Google AdWords to connect your Google My Business account to show up and connect with the location information on the ads. Another tool is Google Analytics, which is a way of seeing who's visited your website, what they did on your website, what their experience was, the demographics involved, if that's enabled. And another tool is called Google Webmaster Tools, in order to see where there's room for improvement, making sure that Google has good information on what your website includes. And there's a lot of tools, and and I don't want to go over all of them because I could probably just keep going. There's a lot of pieces that connect to Google, and essentially, if you want your Google AdWords account to be healthy, you need all of your marketing to be healthy. You need your organization to be healthy. You want the user experience in these different areas to be positive. And when I say user experience, let me back up a step because I might say that and people may not know what that means. A user experience refers to when someone browses your website, if they have if they find what they're looking for, if they enjoy their experience and they don't have to go back to Google, they don't have to bounce back to Google to keep looking, then that essentially is probably a positive user experience. But if they do have to bounce back to Google, Google can measure that, the fact that they had to come back to keep looking, And that will reflect poorly on a website if people have to bounce back. And a lot of websites have high bounce rates. Not to say that a high bounce rate is not common, but lowering that bounce rate is a goal, is an ongoing goal to improve the user experience, which then reflects on your website as your entity as a whole and all these pieces, which will then allow you to get more traffic, because Google is looking to send traffic to organizations and entities that will allow Google to remain the monopoly that they are, with 90% of all search traffic going through Google. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit more detail on a future slide. All right, let's go to the next slide, BJ.
Okay, hey Jacob, we got one other question that came in from Cynthia Hurd. Her question is, how do we apply to the grant, and is there technical assistance to apply for it?
Sure. So applying for the grant, if you do a search on Google for Google Grant, you can find a page, an entire site devoted to having a lot of information about how to apply. One of the first steps is to have a TechSoup account. So essentially applying for an account with TechSoup, if you don't already have one, would be good. One of my first steps is to locate someone's EIN number, employer identification number, through the IRS, and verifying that their 501c3 status is in good shape. And then essentially walking through, there's an application process through Google. But essentially to try and summarize a 2-hour experience over a couple of weeks, I would recommend you could reach out to me, and I'd be glad to answer questions along your journey, or you could hire someone to do it for you. Like, we've done it 29 times, and so it's really a matter of clockwork for me to do it. But I would be glad to try, and if you wanted to do it on your own to save, to keep it in-house, I'd be glad to show you the next step based on where you are and help you go through that process. But I don't have a slide or a document to really give you, but we can, I would say reach out, and I would be glad to help you with what you need to have done.
And Cynthia, we'll provide you Jacob's contact information at the end of today's webinar.
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide, let's go to the next one. All right, so content marketing. All right, so content marketing involves storytelling. It involves knowing how your audience talks, how they communicate, and how you can best communicate ideas to your audience. So we just finished writing an ebook called Content Marketing for Pregnancy Centers. And if you would like a free copy, just email me, and I'll be glad to send you a link to this 44-page ebook. The string attached that we have with this ebook is that I would, by default, add you to our pregnancy center e-letter. Essentially, this is an ebook for pregnancy centers to know, for marketing purposes. I would say we wrote the whole thing with pregnancy centers in mind, but several pieces of this ebook would be applicable to other organizations. And a lot of the principles could be applied to other groups. So we primarily wrote this for pregnancy centers and the situations that they are working through. And so if you would like a free copy, just email me. And if you don't want to be added to the e-letter, just let me know, and I'll be glad to send you a copy and not add you. But just know that that's the string attached with this. With the default string we wrote the e-letter to try and help grow the number of people on our Constant Contact e-letter list who will get one of our e-letters when we send them out about once every 4 months. So it's not very often. We only send out, we do a lot of work before we send off an e-letter, and we often are working working on our own. As the cobbler's shoes are always in bad shape, we often are working on someone else's e-letter opposed to our own. But sometimes there's something that really needs to be shared, and that's when we take the time to send it out to this list. So I actually want to go to the next slide to keep talking about content marketing, because I want to show you an example of the value of really good content. So this is a pregnancy center that is in I believe they're in Northern California. And you can see how it's very flat when it comes to the number of clicks and impressions all the way until May 1st. And then from May 1st, essentially this is April 15th to May 15th. So right in the middle is May 1st. And it's still flat about a day or two after May 1st. But we added this content around May 1st, and then we created these campaigns with Google AdWords. And this one piece of really good content with these new AdWords campaigns and ad groups essentially took this low performing account, this, based on the current website content, and this one article really opened the doors to a lot of traffic, and it continued to grow beyond this. But essentially, I wanted to show that the contrast of how one article, how one piece of content that is written well can really make a difference on how Google will respond to your website and messaging and open the door to more traffic. An example of, actually, we'll be going over some SEO here in a future slide, but some of the pieces that this article did really well is that it had content that had the right amount of depth. Like, it wasn't just a bullet point list of items. We actually had a paragraph per thought. We had inline links to authoritative sources on the topic. So we essentially had citations built into the content. And what I mean by that is, if we have an article about a certain medical word, we would have a link to healthcare.gov or Mayo Clinic or Medical Institute for Sexual Health, or somewhere that is recognized nationally as being authority on that topic in order to back up what we were saying. And we also had really good imagery on this content piece. We used images from Getty Images. We also had an infographic that was branded and matched the content of the page. We also had we made a video for this page, and it also talked about the same topic and had really good graphic design and animation work applied. And overall, it was an example of good content. And then when applied, it helped it made a difference. Like, it literally, Google recognized the quality, and the traffic went up with this quality. And so I just want to say, writing good content, like, we could talk about styles and keyword choice and different ways of communicating, but the main purpose is to write for your audience, but then to weave in the pieces that Google expects and that people will see as being authoritative in a way that will not reduce the experience that your audience has. And essentially go over and aboard. Essentially, if you're going to go work on anything, make sure it's a positive user experience where someone wants to stay on that page longer and have the right amount of information for them to really enjoy answering their questions on on what they're searching for. And with the idea that they will spend time on your site. If we drive content, if we have an ad going to a page, and that page literally just has a bullet point list, or it just mentions the keyword once on the page, that's going to be a bad user experience. Because if you're searching for information on X or Y or Z, and it just mentions that word once on the page, and we come across that a lot. People may not really want to find that page, and they're going to bounce back to Google, and Google is going to recognize that's a low quality experience. And so, I know I probably have said this many times, but content drives the quality of this entire marketing. And so content marketing is super important. And if you don't have good content, then, well, if you do have good content, then you've got a lot to work with. And I would say it's good to polish, it's good to write, and it's good to, and a lot of times pregnancy centers, which is our primary audience who we work with the most, will often have content on certain phrases. And sometimes it's not enough on those phrases, but also they don't have content on lots of other phrases that they're relevant for. There's a lot of pages that are simply not on their website. And these messages don't even have a chance to show up organically or through a pay-per-click ad because the content's just not there. And so if you think about all of the areas that your organization is relevant for, all the things that you do and you're the expert on, you need to have that reflected in the content that's on your website, because then you can create ads, do pay-per-click ads based on those words for those landing pages. And so yeah, essentially, if you have 10 pages of content on this number of keywords, that will limit what your AdWords account can accomplish. And if you grow that library of pages with high quality content, then that will grow what you can advertise on with pay-per-click ads. And if anyone has a pay-per-click ad campaign and you just want help knowing what to do next, connect with me, and I will either help you myself, or I might connect you with one of my team members, and we'll just give you, the next step. I like to call it hurdle help. We will help a lot of people hurdle help style. So we're not trying to teach you from A to Z on something. We're trying to help you get past the current hurdle that you're experiencing so that you can get past it and continue to learn on your own. And if you need help, just reach out and we'll be glad to help you get past the current hurdle so that you can continue to work on this on your own if you're doing it in-house. So we often look at like Christian, working with Christian organizations, working with life-minded organizations as being like on the Christian team or the pro-life team. And we're trying to help other organizations be successful because that aligns with our overall mission of being in God's will. And so even if you're working with someone else, we want you to be successful. And if you're working with us, we want you to be successful. But we're not limited to just helping those who are working with us. We want the team to be successful because that's what we're called to do. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so SEO. So search engine optimization is often thrown around as a phrase that many people may not really know what it means. It boils down to having your website reflect the messaging and words to Google very clearly, and having certain tags in your website code written so that they will be appropriate when pulled into the organic search results. So if you do a search for something and it's below the ad section, it's in that organic section, the title tag of your web page will often get used as the search result title. And the description meta tag will often, not always, but often get used as the description of your organic search results. And the reason why this is important for Google AdWords is because if your page has a really poor title tag, or if it has it doesn't even have a description tag, or description tag's not a reflection of the content, then that lowers your quality score of the page. And so essentially you want your title tag to be appropriate, an appropriate summary based on the content of the page. Again, you don't want to, the title tag should not introduce any new ideas. It should be a reflection of the message on the page. And written in a way that it will be effective as a organic search result title. And then the same thing for the description. You want to write it so that it describes the page and it'll be effective as a description in the organic search results. And so, but there's more to SEO than just that. There's also you want your site to include engaging pieces and to have those pieces tagged so that people using screen readers, because they're visually impaired, can understand your content. So if you have a picture of a young woman playing tennis on your website, the alt tag, the alternate description tag of that image should describe the image so that if someone's using a screen reader because they're visually impaired, so they can understand what that image is of. And part of the reason why that's really important for SEO is because Google is visually impaired. and they need to know what that image is about. And they can read text really well, even though they may not be able to look at an image of a woman playing tennis and know what the message is, but they will know the message of what your alt tag says. And so you want your alt tags to be there and to be relevant. Having YouTube videos embedded on the page, and again, those can be tagged with content that describes the messaging in order to reflect what's in the video. And the video should reflect the message of the page. And so essentially all these pieces sort of come together as making a coherent message and description of what you're trying to say to your audience. And so SEO is a lot of pieces to it, but they're doable. And if you want insight on what you should do next, again, I don't know where you are in your experience. Like, some people have title tags that say home. Some people have, a lot of people have default WordPress title tags that have like the name of their organization, space dash space, the name of the page. That's really common. And what that represents is that it's never been touched. Like, that's the most common scenario, is for someone to simply have a title tag that has never been written and is simply using the default that the system generated. And that's always a poor experience for the user. It'd be so much better to have a writer write the title tag based on the content of the page and based on how people are going to see it. And then there's like tools like Yoast for WordPress users, or you can simply just write them and add them as HTML in several different website experiences. And SEO is really important for raising the quality score of the user's experience on a page, which will then connect with Google AdWords to raise the quality score of someone's experience on your page. Like, that, it's one of these cogs that connects. All right, let's go on to the next slide, compliance. So, compliance. So there's different rules when using a grant, and most or all of these rules do not apply to cash accounts, meaning cash, Google loves to let cash spend, and they won't hold you back. Actually, I don't think any of these rules that I'm going to be going over apply to cash accounts. Yeah, they don't. So you can break any of these rules with cash and get the traffic to flow through, but you can still follow these rules with cash accounts in order to have high quality traffic and not spend money on traffic that may not be helpful, but that Google won't force you to do these things. But with grants, they force you to do certain levels of compliance. And of course, we want to go beyond that in order to keep improving the work, the user's experience. So one of the compliance pieces is there's a rule that says no single keywords. So like, if I wanted to advertise on the word birthdays, I would have to add a second word, like birthdays today or birthdays July, or essentially having some phrase that includes a space in the middle. The interesting thing about this rule is that there are exceptions, and then there are exceptions to exceptions, which it's okay. So the exceptions is that for grant users, there is a list of keywords, of single keywords that you are allowed to use. And these keywords include donation, abortion, adoption. There's essentially about 80 some words that are exceptions, and grant users are allowed to advertise on a single word as long as it's on this exception list. All right, so this is where the exception to the exceptions comes in, or I guess it's better said is there's also rules that are not written down, and you only find out when you break them. So about a month ago, there's a phrase, plan, P-L-A-N, space, B, which is referred to, simply referring to the abortion pill, or abortion. And so Plan B. Plan B has a space in it. However, Google treats it as a single keyword, or essentially they said we can't use Plan B because it's too generic. But at the same time, they have the word abortion on a list of exceptions. So they said, we're allowed to use plan space B space information or any other, as long as we have an additional word added with it and we have two spaces in it. And that made it okay. But essentially it's very weird because their logic said that plan B could mean other things, like I'm building my house and my first plan is to build it this way, but my plan B is to do it this way. And so plan B can be used in many different situations. Yes, I would agree, it's very broad. But if you Google plan B, it's abortion related. That's the primary purpose, the primary use in today's vernacular for that word and phrase. It has a space in it. But we're not allowed to use it. And that's the kind of example of there's compliance where you won't find out because Google has not written that rule down, at least not that I've seen. And we had an account get turned off because we were breaking a rule that wasn't written down. And just know that there are going to be compliance things that catch you off guard, and the compliance changes. They add new rules, they change rules, and and often you'll find compliance issues that don't line up. They don't add up. But yeah, just know that it's not clear. Okay, I'm going to move on. So
Jacob, yes. Sorry, we had another question that came in, anonymous. This was actually related to your last one, so I apologize
sure.
To the attendee who asked this question that I missed. It says, can you share one or two specific examples of exactly what keywords were chosen and what the landing page was? It sounds like the ads described do not use the org's homepage as a landing page. Do you recall back to that?
Yeah, say that one more time. I just want to.
Sure. It says, can you share on two specific examples of exactly what keywords were chosen and what the landing page was? It sounds like the ad describes do not use the org's homepage as the landing page.
Okay. Think of two examples. Pregnancy signs and pregnancy symptoms. So these are two phrases that in that one graph that went shooting up, we had an article written about pregnancy signs and pregnancy symptoms. And I think it's titled the top 12 signs of pregnancy. And with this example, we had it go to a page that was our awesome piece of content on pregnancy signs and symptoms. And we did not drive that to the homepage. However, I have heard other experts say that every Google AdWords campaign should always go to an inside page. I would say every page in your website is in the running. Well, I should say your best pages on your website should be in the running for driving traffic to them with the appropriate keywords. And very often a homepage is more like a hallway where you're driving someone there to then figure out where to go. And so the homepage is probably one of the least effective places to send traffic. However, I would still include it in the mix because for some phrases, like let's say if someone searches on your brand name, send them to your homepage might be very relevant. Of course, it also might be very relevant to send them to your about page or some other page. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But sending people to, I would like to say a blog is a really awesome place to build out content on different topics and then to create advertising campaigns to drive traffic to those blog articles that champion the words and phrases and ideas that they're talking about to really answer questions. And then someone can use the navigation of the website to browse and continue on and click on a call to action piece that might be in the header or in the footer or in the sidebar. But yeah, so I would say the primary landing page is typically a blog article or an inside page. But I would still include the homepage, but I would treat it as a hallway, more like when someone comes over to your house you don't hang out in the hallway. Usually the hallway is just there to get to the kitchen or the bathroom or the bedroom or the man cave or whatever you might happen to have, the library. You know, most people want to go to your library, or maybe most people want to go to your kitchen, or most people want to go to your dining room. The home page is just there to get you to the next room. It doesn't normally solve the answer. It doesn't normally have the answers. It just has all the messaging to help you get to the answer, get to the answers on an inside page. And so Google AdWords is a lot like that. It's like another hallway helping someone get to the answers.
Great. That's a great way to explain that. And we have another question that just popped in real quick, Jacob. Where can we find the Google compliance list of single words that we can use?
I don't know it by heart, but if I was to look it up, I would literally, let me just try it, make sure that this will work. But I would Google single word exceptions, Google AdWords. Let me just verify that that will, Google AdWords, single word exceptions. Yeah, that's it. So if you Google AdWords, single word exceptions, it brings up AdGrant single word policy exceptions. It starts off with charity, donate, donation, and it goes on. Now I'm curious. I am going to tally how many words are in here. I was guessing 80, and I love to check. How do I do that? Oh, I mean, sorry. I know this is taking a time, but I'm going to tell you exactly how many words are in the exception list. There are, according to Excel, 44. Okay, I was completely off. There are 44 words in the exception list. And that's really good to know because you can use those with your grant. Okay, going back to compliance. So if your keyword has a quality score of 2 or less, like, well, essentially a 2 or a 1, because if it's not rated, it doesn't count. But if a keyword has a quality score of 2 or 1, it needs to be turned off to be compliant. And usually that means that you have a web page about XYZ and you're using the letter, you're using a different word that's not relevant to that page, or it's not relevant to the ads that you wrote. And it simply needs to be turned off because the relevance is not high enough, or people's user experience, with that word in your system is not high enough. And so 2s and 1s need to be turned off. But you can always try and improve that experience and try it again in the future. But you'd want to make sure you do a lot of work before turning it back on, because otherwise you're endangering your account by having low quality pieces. And then the next piece is a 5% click-through rate. So for every 10 people, for every 100 people that see an impression of one of your ads, meaning it shows up on their screen, if 5% or 5 out of 100 click on your ad or more, then you're compliant. If you get 2% or lower than 5%, then you're not compliant and your account is in jeopardy of being turned off. But there's lots of things you can do to raise the CTR by turning off low performing pieces and creating better performing pieces. Most of our accounts are around 10% on average. We have some higher, some lower, but that's pretty typical. And the idea is 5% is the low point, not the normal point. But with cash accounts, it's very interesting how cash accounts will often be well below 5%. I've seen many cash accounts sitting at 2% as a CTR. And for a long time, it was talked about in the industry that 2% was good. But then these grants came out with a 5% click-through rate, and everyone's like, well, maybe 2% wasn't good. But when it comes to the cash side, you can get by with 2%, and then Google won't raise any flags or endanger your account status. But yeah, essentially grants need 5% or higher. And another example of compliance is appropriate relevant geotagging. So if you have a brick and mortar church, or you have a brick and mortar pregnancy clinic, and you can essentially draw a circle, a circle around your center. Maybe that circle has a radius of 20 miles. Or maybe if you're in a rural area, you might have a radius of 50 miles. Or if you're in New York, they might have a radius of 3 miles based on the population and how far people typically travel to get to where you are. But essentially, you can customize, where you're advertising. You can draw circles, you can indicate zip codes, cities, counties, and advertise to the people that are most likely wanting to see your ad and use your services. And so we've seen campaigns where someone exists in New York, but then they're advertising nationally, getting traffic from people in other states that would never travel to New York for a pregnancy test. And so that's an example of not doing it right. But sometimes you might have content on your website. Let's say your church website has content about the book of John, and it's a Bible study that's free for someone to use. That could be international content. You could actually advertise that to everyone in America, everyone in Canada, probably everyone with an English-speaking country, to take advantage of that sort of messaging and content based on language barriers as being the limitation, because they don't need to travel to your church to enjoy that result. And so as some groups, they might have a national campaign for some pieces, they might have a state-based campaign for appropriate pieces, and then if someone needs to travel to that location, they might have a very localized campaign. Maybe it's just for their county or their city or so many miles around their brick and mortar, based on where people would most likely travel from. And so anyways, but having relevant geotagging just simply makes it so you're advertising appropriately. And if you weren't advertising appropriately, Google could tell you to do it appropriately because there's a compliance rule on that topic. And I'm not going over all the compliance issues, because once you have a grant and once you're using it, you will get a report that says you're compliant here and you're not compliant here. And if you're not compliant somewhere, then that shows that you need to go fix that, within 2 weeks in order to maintain your account's active state. And sometimes accounts will go down for becoming uncompliant, and sometimes it won't even make sense, but you have to follow up with Google to get them turned back on, and that's part of the process too. There's some, like for example, we've had accounts where there's two conversion tracking pieces need to be set up. And we've had Google flag accounts that have 8 conversion tracking pieces set up, and they flag it as not having, the conversion tracking is not being set up correctly when it is. And so we're communicating with them on what needs to be done there. And it might be a matter of maybe they're disagreeing over the type of conversions that we're tracking. And so that's something that we're actively investigating with Google, is what their expectation is for some of the conversion tracking. Like if they think that the conversion tracking is tracking something that might be getting too many conversions, then they may show concern there, but that may not always be described in some of the descriptions. There's a lot to this, and I can understand that Google, I do honestly believe that Google is doing the best that they can with all the pieces and players involved, and there's a lot to it. And I believe sometimes Google gets used as a tool by powerful people as a weapon against others, but I think Google sometimes is more of a tool than the culprit, because of how they are bent. So the next slide is going to go over some of that, how Google is being used as an attack on pregnancy clinics. So in late May of just this year, Google came out with abortion certification, which has been enacted earlier this month. And essentially what this means is that a pregnancy clinic and an abortion clinic has to register as either providing abortions or not providing abortions. And that tag of providing, this provides abortions or not provides abortions, will be added to the advertisements, the pay-per-click ads, when someone is searching to get an abortion. And the reason why this is a violation is because it's a violation, in my opinion, is because it is compelled speech. Essentially, Google is adding certain text to these ads in order to influence people in a certain way. And compelled speech is normally, well, it goes against our First Amendment rights as Americans. However, Google is not the government, so for our First Amendment rights are not having to be upheld by a private company. The interesting thing about this is that it seemed, and this is me speaking based on reading articles in various newspapers and sources along those lines, it seems that this started based off of a pro-abortion congresswoman writing a letter to Google complaining about Google giving grant dollars and or advertising, even with cash dollars, giving letting pregnancy clinics advertise to their audience. And essentially she was complaining about that, calling them fake clinics, calling them deceptive. And essentially what Google came up with was this abortion certification. And again, this is me talking mostly from my gut and from reading articles because I don't have an insight window into those conversations with Google and these Congress people. But I believe Google responds to government representatives, because Google is not just a monopoly. They're not just a monopoly here in the U.S. They're a global monopoly, including China and 82 countries. And so they're very powerful across the globe, and the only way that someone can work in China at that level is to bend or to work with the government officials in China. And the same thing here in the US. I think when a representative of Congress writes a letter to Google, Google listens and they respond. That's how they operate. And I believe the solution for this would be for a like-minded congressperson to write a letter to provide the appropriate pushback, or a like-minded president or vice president or representative to write a letter and provide that appropriate pushback for us to have a fair platform once again. Because this rule, this abortion certification, it was stated that it was because of this deception being done through advertising on pay-per-click ads. The interesting thing about that is every time someone sees an ad, it's on a device that is designed to take a screenshot, on someone's phone or on a computer. These devices have buttons to take a screenshot, and that evidence could have been made. And it wasn't ever provided in any of these articles, the evidence of who was doing these deceptive ads as they were being described. Another interesting fact is that there's already rules in place, both with the federal government, the Federal Trade Commission, when it comes to truth in advertising, and with Google. Google already had policies about truth in advertising, and if someone was to be deceptive, they could have their account turned off. And so if there was a player, an organization advertising deceptively, they could have been turned off, or they could have been fined by the Federal Trade Commission. But instead, I don't think that was the case, because I think the opposition in this scenario is they're simply mad that NIFLA versus Becerra was passed with a 5-4 decision, saying that the freedom of speech was upheld in California, which then followed into Hawaii and other places where pregnancy centers don't have to post in 13 languages where they can get an abortion. The freedom of speech was upheld. Just simply reflecting also that our Supreme Court is of the utmost importance for freedom of speech and life. So another interesting piece that I want to bring up is called word of mouth. So over the course of time, and this is based on my experience working with many pregnancy centers, word of mouth has been cited as the #1 vehicle for, and this would be true probably for many other organizations as well, even though all my data is coming from pregnancy centers. Word of mouth has been cited for decades as being the #1 way that someone heard about that organization and why they decided to come in. There might have been other things on the list, like billboards, radio, TV, signage, internet /website /Google, Facebook, social media. wherever someone happened to be advertising or represented could be on that intake form list of how they heard about you. And for a long time, word of mouth by a professional, word of mouth by a friend, both of those were above Google/internet. But then about 6 years ago in San Jose, which is where Google is based, it's like their home turf, word of mouth was passed by Google/internet. And then just this last week, I was talking with centers in several different states at this Advanced Training Institute. And several of them were reflecting on their numbers and how internet has passed word of mouth for them as well. So it seemed to me that word of mouth was being passed in the bigger markets, the bigger cities where people are more connected to their phone than they are to their friends. But it seems that that trend is following into less populated areas or less connected areas are also following in that trend of being connected more with their phone, more so than word of mouth. And so to bring this back in, word of mouth used to be the public square as the primary way for people, where people decided where to go to a restaurant or where to go to get help with their unplanned pregnancy or where to go to church and try out a church. Now, internet/Google is either about to pass, is passing, or has passed for many different groups on how that traffic is coming into a organization and how they're getting connected with new members, new clients. And so this is really important because right now it's passing word of mouth. And the thing with trends is that it's going to continue for a while until there's something else that changes it. And so this is the primary vehicle today, primary vehicle probably for the last 2 years. And not to say that it wasn't a good vehicle in years behind that, but it used to be vehicle number 2 or 3, but now it's vehicle number 1, and number 1 is getting stronger as we progress into the future. And so having your pay-per-click ads, having your website on Google organic search results, having it listed on Google My Business, having it be present in this space is really important or internet/Google/social media, but having it present in this space is becoming more important. And the fact that Google, as a private company, has the ability to modify that experience is concerning. Senator Cruz has been interviewing, thanks to YouTube, I get to watch Senator Cruz interviewing leaders with Google. And one of the questions that he was asking them, or some of the dialogue that he was having with the representative from Google was, the reason why big tech has a path on being a monopoly in this space is because there's the expectation or rule, and I don't know all the details, but there's probably a lot more there. The expectation is that they provide a level playing field for all viewpoints to use this platform without biases being applied. And an interesting thing that he also then commented on was he asked the representative from Google, do you know how much money the leadership from Google donated to Hillary? And she didn't know, but he told her the number was 1.2 million. And then he asked her, do you know how much was donated to Trump's campaign? And she didn't know. And he said, it's easy, it's a 0. And so essentially that shows the liberal leaning from leadership when it comes to their financial donations. And so if we end up seeing things like the abortion certification, that is leaning that same direction. And there needs to be pushback for Google to, anyways, that's going into some more modern, current news, but maybe not going over the basics of AdWords, but I think you should be aware that there's a lot going on here. It's a really important space to participate. And the fact that Google has 90% of the search traffic, which means Yahoo, AOL, Bing, Lycos, Dogpile, and all of these other old, search engines that may or may not still exist, all share 10%, while Google is sitting on a comfortable 90% monopoly, making it so, like if you were to get upset with Google, you can't really go to Bing to advertise because it doesn't have the right market share or the right way to satisfy your needs when it comes to this traffic. If you were to get upset with Amazon, you could still go to Walmart. If you were to get upset with McDonald's, there's Chick-fil-A. There's lots of options. But when it comes to Google, they've got a monopoly, and whether that means breakup or whether that means like legislation or I don't know. But there's things are going to be continuing to change, and I'm thankful that Senator Cruz has a smart team working on trying to do things here, because it's a lot of work to keep up with all the changes. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Let's go to the next slide. If there's any questions, I would love to answer them here. And I'd also like to extend the invitation to contact anyone, whether it's Betty or myself after this call. We would love to communicate in the future to help you find success in this space.
Thank you, Jacob, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate you joining us today and answering the questions as they came through our chat. So, and thank you everyone else who were joining us today. Jacob has provided us a lot of great resources to utilize. And if you're interested, like he said, connecting with Jacob or his team at iRapture.com to help your organization with Google AdWords grants or along with any other online marketing work, feel free to contact him. His contact information is available to you on the screen. You can reach him directly at 520-777-1895 or email at jacob@irapture.com. Again, thank you all for joining us today. A copy of today's webinar will be emailed to you directly to use back as a resource. Please note you can also explore other resources and tools at Stewardship's Facebook or LinkedIn social channels and our website at stewardshiptechnology.com. There you can also find future webinars, products, services, as well as trends and hot topics for nonprofits and faith communities. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye now.